Um, did you know that 80% of our development has been funded by Western institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, the International Development Bank, European Union, OECD, the US institutions? 80% of every development we've done, I have been funded by a Western institution, or have been funded by Western institutions. The reason I'm talking about, discovered alternatives of global credit, and there is majorly China, and many African countries that have preferred to go to China or have preferred to go to the East. The response from the West has never been that sweet. It hasn't been that sugar. So China have heavily invested in Africa, let's say in Africa, and even in other global South economies like the Southeast Asia, and also the Latin America. China has heavily invested in infrastructure development in those economies. But it's not because China wants to do that. It's because China, it is not because China really wants to do that or because they're happy to do it, but because, you understand, China need to do that. China need to do it because China has been on the course to become one of the global economic powers, and they already are actually, but they're number 2 in terms of GDP. US is number 1 in terms of GDP, gross domestic product, with $28.5 trillion GDP economy. China is following by 18.9 there GDP. So they're number 2. The BRI, which is the Belt and Road Initiative, which is a concoction of infrastructure development projects. It is a global infrastructure agenda by the Chinese. They started this in 2013, and many countries, especially the global South, like Kenya, Tanzania, and many other countries in Africa, has come on board to be part of the BRI. So you find that most of projects that are currently being done by most of these countries, they are under BRI. So these are railways, right? These are expressways, these are roads, these are airports, these are schools, hospitals, and things that connect. Because what China wants is that in the next 20 years, it has an easy access to the world, especially the global South. Why? Because China, as you see, is a growing economy. It's still growing. I'm telling you that it's not like the first world economies like the UK or US. They are not at that level. Although in terms of GDP, because they're the one of China is the country with the biggest population in the world. I think 1.4 now, apart from India. Okay, so it's a big population. Of course, that translates into a big economy. But also at the same time, they are producing a lot and they're selling a lot to the outside world. That shows you that China needs the world more compared to other countries or compared to its other global competitors, like the US and China and other economies, because China relies on export. They rely on export in the sense that they have to sell to the world for them to survive because they're producing a lot. It has become a center of global economy, and they rely too much in exports. And for that to be successful, they really have to ensure that they have easier access to other parts of the world, especially to the global South, because global South, if you've noticed, has always been a battleground of global fights between global powers. The US, the Chinese, Russians, everybody wants to conquer some part of Africa. And this has not just started now. This started even long way before. During the times of the Ottoman Empire. I remember that Berlin Conference where they partitioned Africa into different European countries. This is where they tell where they're powerful. So China now that the conflict has become more financial conflicts, nowadays the fight has become more financial fights. And if it's slavery, it's financial slavery. And many African countries are financial slaves to the Western institutions, and that is true. And soon enough, they're going to be financial slaves to Chinese, because everybody is going to China. to get loans from there, because China offer more favorable concessional loans compared to other countries. So you find that many African countries, they want cheap, more accessible loans. They go to China to be able to fund their development. And because the reason why this is, by the way, the reason why more loans from China are more cheap and more accessible is because of the BRI. Because most of the projects that African countries want to implement, that they go for funding in China, are BRI projects, and the BRI projects are Chinese projects. You understand? So the question is, who becomes who? I mean, who is good? Because the question is, historically, the Western countries have been fundamentally involved in Africa development, especially infrastructure development, and even beyond that, when it comes to health, education, agriculture, other sectors, they've been fundamentally involved, and they've funded a lot of projects since independence up to now. Now, Chinese came in just the other day, which is I think 2008, from 2008 up to now. They've also massively invested in Africa's infrastructure development. Who comes the better financer? Who should we go to? Because in the end of the day, we need them. Somebody will say, why don't we talk about self-reliance? Why can't we fund our projects our own? That's not the reality. The reality is that we do not have money, and we largely rely on borrowing. And most of those borrowing comes from, external sources, which are majorly Western institutions, and now China. In fact, we have a ceiling which was set by the parliament, and now, by the way, the National Treasury has put a ceiling which ought to be a percentage of a GDP. The threshold is 55%, so meaning that the debt GDP ratio shouldn't go beyond 55% of the Kenya's GDP. But now we've gone beyond that. In fact, when that was said, it was already beyond that. It was, I think, roughly 68, 69. It's still there, I think, but we are improving downwards. We're trying to push it back to 55%. But still, we're still struggling. We are even beyond the ceiling itself. And that shows you that there's a rising, the fiscal space. The Kenya's fiscal space is limiting. There's going to get to a time where we're not going to be able to borrow unless we do what? We push up the ceiling. When the current administration came into power, one of their aims was to try to cut down on debt and try to repay debt so that at least we become less reliant into debt. But that hasn't prevailed yet. You see, the truth is, we are going to still need debt. We will still going to the US, we will still go to EU, we will still going to go to China. So the question is, who is the better one? We need these fundings. So the question is, who do we go to? I mean, who is the better one? The Chinese or the Western countries that have traditionally funded our development? Yes, what do you think about that? Do you think it's IMF? Do you think it's World Bank? Do you think it's China? Who is the best person to go to? The Western institutions have significantly funded our projects since 1960, since independence up to now. The Chinese came in and have also heavily invested in our infrastructure development since 2008. And the Chinese loans have come to be concessional. They are cheap, they are accessible, they are favorable, they have longer grace periods, they have favorable terms, they have lower interest rates compared to the Western loan or to the Western credit. Borrowing does not just come like that. When you go to a donor and a donor decides to fund your project, there must be a catch. Even if the donor will get something in return, of course, he's giving you a loan and you will return the loan with the interest. But the thing is, there's still always that ulterior catch that the donor has to get, and that is resource extractions. Many countries in Africa, we are rich in minerals, we are rich in natural resources. So when our leaders go to the IMF, when our leaders go to the World Bank, when our leaders go to these Western institutions or even China, one of the conversations they have to have is how are we going to get the oil, how are we going to get the gold, how are we going to get the all those resources that are in the Congo, that are in Angola, that are in. So you end up having the loan from China, but the Chinese end up to get your massive natural resources away without you gaining a bit, and so I mean you lose it all. So it's not like these people are good people. They give you loan because of resource extractions. I know there's going to be those conversations of how then can we shape conversations towards our self-reliance. Do we really need to go to China? Do we really need to go to IMF? Do we really need to go to the World Bank for us to be able to implement our infrastructure projects, for us to be able to do development projects? Do we really have to do that? We don't have to do that. But if systems don't change, especially if political systems don't change, if our economic systems don't change, then I don't think we're going to have any change in the future. So we have to settle with the fact that who is the better devil than the other? The Western institutions, the EU, the World Bank, the IMF, the US, all these other countries, or China, which give you loan in an affordable way, in a cheap way, in a way that more attractive to you, but at the same time you have to think of how they're going to take their resources.